There exists a rare breed of person who never raises their voice, never throws an insult, never makes an explicit threat, yet watches their opponents crumble as if struck by a curse. You've encountered them. They enter a room and the atmosphere congeals. They remain silent while others trip over themselves, panic, and fall apart. You've asked yourself what secret they possess. What makes them bulletproof? The answer is a form of wisdom that is deliberately hidden from you. The most effective commanders throughout history didn't secure their legacies through bloody battles. They won by engineering a reality where combat became unnecessary. They dismantled their rivals psychologically, strategically, and invisibly long before the first move was ever made. And today, I am going to lay out their complete system. Every law, every technique, every dispassionate calculation. By the final sentence, the person who started this video will be fundamentally different from the one who finishes it. Stay with me. It's time to understand how true leverage works. The unseen conflict. A fundamental lie has been sold to you since childhood. You were taught that authority belongs to the loudest person. You were taught that strength is physical confrontation, overt aggression, dominance through sheer power. That narrative was designed to keep you powerless. The actual truth, the uncomfortable reality, is that the most influential individual present is often the one you overlook entirely. He isn't shouting. He isn't beating his chest. He is observing. He is cataloging. He is silently mapping the fears, the fragile egos, the hidden fault lines in everyone around him. And he does this with a placid expression that betrays absolutely zero information. This is the unseen conflict. It has been waged for millennia by pharaohs, senators, warlords, and the most feared operators in human history. Niccolo Machiavelli dissected this concept with surgical precision. He advised that a leader must embody both the fox and the lion. But the critical detail everyone misses is that the fox operates first, always. Because the fox wins contests that the lion never even realizes have begun. Consider that. The most decisive triumphs were not carved onto battlefields soaked in blood. They were secured in quiet chambers, through subtle shifts in perception and alliances formed in whispers, executed so flawlessly that the opponent was neutralized before he knew he was in a war. That is the level you must ascend to. No more reacting. No more exploding. No more wasting your limited energy on targets that don't serve your long game. You must begin to perceive existence as a chessboard, not a street brawl. Fists are tools for the impulsive. Strategy is the domain of the elite. From this instant forward, you are no longer a pawn reacting to stimuli. You are the architect, seal watchful, 4 moves ahead, and completely invisible until the moment it is irrevocably late. The discipline of calculated waiting. Most people sabotage their own potential not from a lack of intelligence, not from a lack of drive, but from a catastrophic lack of patience. They react instantly. They move prematurely. They allow their emotional state to dictate their timing, and their timing becomes their fatal error every single time. A true strategist never acts on impulse. He waits. He analyzes how the landscape evolves. He allows the environment to shift while his adversary grows impatient, reckless, and careless. Machiavelli cautioned that the person who hurries to act without understanding the context will always become subordinate to the person who knows how to wait. History validates this principle repeatedly. Consider the most effective conquerors. They didn't charge blindly into fortified positions. They applied pressure indirectly. They delayed engagement. They fostered uncertainty through apparent inactivity alone. While their opponents depleted supplies, exhausted their forces, and made frantic choices born from anxiety, the patient commander remained still, consolidating strength, gathering data, letting the passage of time do the work for him. This is the lesson you must absorb. Patience is not passive. Patience is a highly aggressive stance because it compels your opponent to expose himself first. The one who moves first from a place of desperation always reveals his vulnerabilities. You offer them nothing, no emotional response, no deadline, no hint of your intentions or your moment of execution. You become a phantom in their consciousness. They begin to falter because your quietness unnerves them more than any verbal assault ever could. They fill the void you've created with their own anxieties, their own fabricated stories, their own dread. And that dread consumes them internally while you haven't expended any energy. Time is not your opponent. Time is your sharpest instrument. Learn to exist within it. Learn to use its weight, because the person who controls patience doesn't chase success. Success is dragged to his feet. Master the lens. Master the outcome. There exists a domain more critical than any physical ground, more conclusive than any army, more destructive than any weapon ever designed. That domain is the human mind. Whoever dictates the story dictates the conclusion. This isn't abstract philosophy. This is the most ancient principle of influence ever recorded. Machiavelli understood that perception holds more power than objective fact. He observed that people judge with their eyes more than their hands. The implication is devastating. Humans do not react to what is real. They react to what they accept as real. The strategist who understands this doesn't waste effort fighting for land. He fights for interpretation. He decides what events signify. He dictates what people notice, what they feel, and what they ultimately believe. While his rival is sharpening weapons, he is composing narratives. While his rival is constructing defenses, he is constructing reputations. A person of genuine power never lets another define his identity. He never allows rumors to propagate unchecked. He never lets the public write his story, because the public is easily directed, and whoever reaches them first secures the victory. You must manage your story with the accuracy of a surgeon and the resolve of a sovereign. Every public statement must be deliberate. Every period of silence must be purposeful. Every action must transmit a message you have pre-scripted. When others observe you, they must see precisely what you have authorized them to see. Nothing beyond that. Your opponents will attempt to alter your story. I will circulate falsehoods, distort your motives, and frame you as the antagonist. Let them begin, but ensure they never finish. Because the person who holds the narrative doesn't need to defend himself. He simply adjusts the illumination until the accuser is exposed in his own shadow. The conflict isn't fought with metal. It's fought with meaning. Control the meaning and you control everything. The arsenal of intentional quiet. Most people dread silence. It creates discomfort. It generates anxiety. It forces them to fill the space with unprocessed words, accidental admissions, and reactions they can't retrieve. And that is precisely why quietness represents one of the most formidable tools you will ever possess. A genuine strategist doesn't speak to vent. He speaks to produce a result. And when speaking won't produce that result, he withdraws into silence, and that quietness becomes a storm inside the minds of everyone observing. Machiavelli recognized that excessive speech reveals your position. It hands your adversaries a diagram of your fears, your wants, and your future actions. But a person who remains quiet becomes an unsolvable puzzle. And what people cannot solve, they eventually fear. You must internalize this. Silence is not an absence of power. It is power in its most concentrated form. When someone attacks you and you respond with silence, you haven't surrendered. You've assumed the most elevated position on the field. You've communicated without a word that they don't warrant your energy. That cuts deeper than any insult. That injures more than any retaliation. Observe what occurs when you cease responding to those who provoke you. Observe how they intensify, how they thrash, how they start to disintegrate because they anticipated a conflict and you gave them an abyss. They can't strike at vapor. They can't dispute with absence. They're left isolated in a confrontation they initiated against someone who never appeared. And that is when they defeat themselves. Every significant strategist understood this. Words are ammunition. You don't waste ammunition on insignificant targets. You preserve it. You conserve it. And when you finally do speak, it lands with devastating impact because the audience has been leaning forward, waiting, suspended on every moment of your quiet. Engineer their self-destruction. The most sophisticated victory in all of strategy is the one where your opponent collapses and you never laid a hand on him. He fell by his own actions. He dismantled himself with his own arrogance, his own avarice, his own blindness. You merely created the circumstances that made his self-destruction unavoidable. This represents the apex of strategic thinking, and it's brutally straightforward once you comprehend human psychology. Every person has an ego. Every person has a vulnerability they refuse to acknowledge. The moment you identify that vulnerability, you don't attack it. You nourish it. You cultivate it like a toxic seed and let it expand until it consumes him entirely. Machiavelli noted that men are so simple-minded and so dominated by immediate wants that a skilled operator will always find those willing to be misled. Absorb that. You don't need to fabricate. You don't need to manipulate with obvious tricks. You simply need to recognize what someone already wants to believe about himself and let him believe it more intensely. If your rival believes he's exceptionally intelligent, allow it. Give him space to overvalue himself. Compliment his intellect where others can hear. Observe how he stops preparing, stops analyzing, stops respecting the contest. In his mind, he's already succeeded. That is his most exposed moment. That is when the surface beneath him is thinnest. And when it fractures, you won't need to push. He'll descend on his own, disoriented, while you remain untouched above. The greatest commanders never wasted resources on individuals already engineering their own collapse. They simply positioned themselves at a secure distance, eliminated every safety mechanism with precise intent, and waited for natural forces to perform their inevitable function. You don't need to annihilate your opponent. You need to supply adequate freedom. He'll manage the rest. He always does. Strategic bonds as protective layers. No commander, regardless of capability, has ever achieved anything significant in isolation. The concept of the self-made individual is precisely that, a concept designed to maintain isolation and vulnerability in those who accept it. Machiavelli was explicit about this. A leader standing alone is a leader who falls first. Influence isn't a solo performance. It's a structure of connections, commitments, and reciprocal obligations deliberately constructed over time so that when difficulty arrives, and it always arrives, you aren't exposed in the open. You're surrounded by barriers formed from the allegiance of individuals who would rather support you than watch you fall. But here's where most fail. They attempt to form alliances during emergencies. They seek support when already wounded. They offer commitment only when they require something, and everyone detects this. A true strategist builds his network long before any conflict emerges. He invests in others when he requires nothing. He provides value, protection, and respect during calm periods so that when crisis emerges, his supporters don't hesitate. They act on his behalf without being requested because he made them feel significant when he had no obligation to. This is calculated generosity. This isn't kindness without purpose. This is placing components on the board years ahead so that when your opponent finally moves against you, he discovers something alarming. You aren't isolated. You're never isolated. And those beside you aren't there because you compensated them. They're there because you cultivated something currency can't acquire, commitment forged during peace. Your adversaries will attempt to separate you. They'll whisper behind your back, trying to turn your network against you. Allow the attempt. Because someone who builds relationships with intention and authenticity doesn't have a network that fractures. He has a living, thinking fortress that defends itself. You don't need to carry every weapon. You need to be the person other weapon bearers refuse to abandon. Construct your support system before you require it. That's the distinction between someone who merely survives and someone who becomes untouchable. The intimidation of the unknown. There exists something far more effective than physical force, far more debilitating than any concrete threat. That something is the perception of what you might be capable of. The ambiguous, the unarticulated, the shadow of a repercussion that has never been specified but is palpably present whenever you enter a space. Machiavelli wrote that it's preferable to be feared than loved if both aren't possible. But the element most misinterpret is that fear doesn't derive from aggression. Authentic fear, the kind that immobilizes groups and keeps rivals conscious at 3 a.m., derives from unpredictability. It derives from standing. It derives from the steady, unshakable sense that this individual could execute something I can't foresee. A true strategist doesn't issue threats. Threats are confessions of weakness. Someone who announces what he'll do is essentially pleading to be taken seriously. But someone who remains quiet and possesses a history of precise, deliberate action, that individual doesn't plead for anything. The environment already respects him because the environment has observed what occurs to those who undervalued him. You must cultivate this presence around yourself like armor created from the heat of your own restraint. Never expose your complete capability. Never display all your information. Permit others to observe just enough to recognize you're dangerous, but never sufficient to understand how. Allow them to speculate. Allow them to murmur. Allow their imagination to construct a version of you that's 10 times more intimidating than reality, because the image they generate internally will always exceed anything you could actually do. This is psychological operations at its most refined. You aren't harming anyone. You aren't raising a hand. You're simply existing in a manner that makes lesser individuals uneasy and unprepared opponents hesitant. Intimidation without physical force is the most efficient influence available. It costs you nothing and extracts everything from your rival. His certainty, his focus, his bravery. He's already neutralized the moment he begins questioning what you're capable of, and you haven't executed a single action. That is expertise. That is the path of the strategist. Eliminate sentiment. Become indecipherable. Emotion represents the single greatest betrayer of influential people. It has brought down dynasties, dissolved partnerships, and transformed brilliant planners into reckless liabilities within a single moment. Anger renders you predictable. Fear renders you manageable. Affection renders you exploitable. And someone who displays his emotions openly has provided his adversaries with direct access to his choices. Machiavelli cautioned that those who operate from passion are essentially enslaved while appearing free. They believe they're deciding when, in reality, they're being directed by invisible forces that anyone with clear vision can identify and exploit. A genuine strategist removes himself from this vulnerability entirely. He doesn't suppress his emotions. That's the error of those who eventually explode. No, he moves beyond them. He trains himself to notice his own anger without surrendering to it. He observes his fear rise and permits it to move through him like wind through an empty corridor. He experiences everything but is controlled by nothing. This is the ancient discipline that distinguished rulers from subjects and commanders from regular soldiers. When you become indecipherable, you become uncontrollable. No one can direct someone they can't interpret. No one can provoke someone who doesn't react. No one can destabilize someone whose expression reveals nothing while his mind calculates 17 moves ahead. Your rivals will evaluate you. They'll insult you publicly. They'll target what you value. They'll attempt every emotional trigger available because that's their only method of engagement. And when none of those triggers work, when they push and pull and shout into the emptiness of your restraint, something fractures within them. Not within you. Within them. Because someone who can't be emotionally moved can't be defeated through conventional methods. And most people possess only conventional methods. You must practice this daily, not during dramatic moments, but during minor interactions. When someone disrespects you, pause. When someone provokes you, breathe. When circumstances attempt to rush you into a reaction, deliberately decelerate and let the quiet remind everyone present that you aren't governed by noise. You're governed only by strategy, only by purpose, only by the dispassionate assessment of what serves your extended objectives. The field rewards the individual with the steadiest hands and the most composed mind. Eliminate the emotion. Become the barrier that nothing breaches. Become so indecipherable that your rivals stop attempting and start dreading what they can't perceive behind your eyes. That isn't coldness. That's liberation. The most potent form of liberation available. The conclusive action they never anticipate. Every significant campaign contains a moment, a single decisive moment where everything transforms. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's precise. And by the time anyone recognizes what's occurred, it's already finished. This is the conclusive action. The action your opponent never foresees because you've spent weeks, months, sometimes years positioning yourself so perfectly that your strike doesn't resemble a strike at all. It resembles inevitability. Resembles coincidence. It resembles the natural progression of circumstances aligning. But there's nothing natural about it. Every component was arranged by your hand. Every pathway that closed for your opponent was sealed by your design. And the beautiful, unsettling truth is that he'll never recognize it was you. Machiavelli wrote that the most effective defense a leader can possess is avoiding the hatred of his people. But what he also understood, what only the most perceptive extract from his writings, is that the most effective offense is one never traced to the originator. A genuine strategist doesn't leave evidence. He doesn't celebrate publicly. He doesn't stand over his defeated rival and declare victory, because that creates martyrs. That invites retaliation. That exposes your methods to the next rival observing from the margins. No, the true strategist operates quietly, strikes with exactness, and withdraws so completely that the world attributes the outcome to circumstance rather than intention. You must acquire this skill. You must arrange your successes so they appear unavoidable rather than manufactured. When your rival loses his supporters, it should appear they departed independently. When he loses his resources, it should appear as misfortune. When his standing deteriorates, the public should believe he caused it himself. And in a sense, he did because you simply established the conditions and allowed human nature to complete the process. This isn't cruelty. This is construction. Your engineering results the way an architect designs structures, with mathematics, with pressure calculations, with comprehension of where force must be applied and where it must be released. The conclusive action is never about force. It's about placement. It's about designing a moment where every variable aligns in your favor and the outcome feels so organic that no one questions it. Most individuals never achieve this level because they're addicted to recognition. They want acknowledgement. They want praise. But the strategist who craves praise has compromised his primary advantage, invisibility. Permit others to accept recognition. Permit historians to debate what occurred. You'll know the reality. And reality is all that matters when you're positioned where no one observed you constructing. The conclusive action isn't the loudest. It's the quietest. It's the one that terminates the contest while your opponent still studies the arrangement, still plans his next maneuver against someone who has already succeeded and departed without a sound. That is influence, not the version presented in entertainment, but the authentic version. The version that transforms everything and leaves no indication. Assume command of your existence. Everything shared with you today wasn't theoretical. It wasn't abstract discussion for appearing insightful. It was a framework. A dispassionate, exact, unambiguous framework for a form of influence most individuals will never experience because they're too occupied reacting, too occupied being emotional, too occupied fighting conflicts that should have been resolved before the initial exchange. But you aren't most individuals. You remain present. You didn't navigate away. You didn't become distracted by something simpler and more comfortable. You remained because something internally acknowledged that these weren't merely words for entertainment. They were guidance. And now you must recognize something that will determine whether this content transforms your existence or becomes merely another thing you observed and disregarded by tomorrow. Understanding without implementation is the most costly form of ignorance. You could memorize every statement Machiavelli recorded. You could study every commander who ever existed. You could comprehend every principle of human psychology, every law of influence, every discipline of composure ever instructed. And none of it will matter if you don't act, starting today, starting now, not next week, not when you feel prepared, now. Because readiness is a falsehood that uncommitted individuals tell themselves to justify another day of immobility. The effective strategist doesn't wait until he feels equipped. He becomes equipped by moving. He refines his approach in the field, not in the security of his shelter. You must assume command of your existence. No one is arriving to rescue you. No one is arriving to provide you with a strategy. No one is arriving to fight your conflicts or construct your alliances or protect your reputation while you remain inactive and anticipate optimal conditions. You're alone in leadership, and that isn't a burden. That's the most significant gift you'll ever receive. Because the individual who depends on no one for rescue becomes the individual no one can shatter. Apply what you've learned today with surgical accuracy. Practice patience when every instinct demands reaction. Control your narrative when circumstances attempt to rewrite your story. Utilize your quiet when lesser individuals demand your attention. Construct relationships before you require them. Cultivate respect without ever raising your hand. Eliminate emotion from your choices and become so indecipherable that your rivals abandon their approaches out of pure confusion. And when the moment arrives for your conclusive action, make it quiet, make it clean, and make it permanent. You aren't the individual you were 20 minutes ago. Something has adjusted. Something behind your eyes is more measured now, more aware. That isn't darkness. That's clarity. The type of clarity that emerges only when someone stops existing accidentally and starts existing deliberately. If this content activated something inside you that refuses to return to dormancy, I want you to post one comment below. Write the words "silent strategist." Let that be your declaration. Let that be the instant the previous version of you formally concluded and the new version was activated. And if you want additional content like this, content that doesn't simply motivate you for 5 minutes, but permanently restructures how you perceive existence, then activate that subscription button right now. Press the like button so this reaches another individual prepared to awaken. And enable notifications, because what's approaching on this channel will make today appear like the preliminary briefing. This isn't the conclusion. This is your initial directive. Welcome to the transition. Now proceed and make your quiet louder than their disturbance.